Hey guys, Will here. So welcome to our brand new triple 45-inch curved OLED display sim rig. Now you might be wondering, why the heck have we built this rig when we already have a triple 65-inch 4K sim rig? Now if you haven't already seen that rig, I would definitely recommend check out the links down in the description below that take you through that setup. But believe it or not, we've been running that setup now for 4 years and it's been serving us really well in that time. But in the time since we built that rig, display technology has come quite a long way, particularly when it comes to OLED technology and curved displays like what we have here. Now these particular displays, as you can see, have a very aggressive curve, and we'll get into some of the details around that as we get on through today's video. But you might have seen some pretty high profile YouTube channels saying things like these are the best possible displays for sim racing. Now straight away on paper, with the benefit of the experience that I've had with a lot of other types of setups, I knew that there were going to be some really important compromises and considerations when it came to setting up a rig like this, but I wasn't sure exactly how good it was going to be, and that's what I want to share the process of today with you guys. So if you are looking at a setup like this, or you're just curious about what a setup like this is like, this is going to be the video for you. We're going to tell you all the things that you need to be aware of and all the things you need to consider if you're looking at a setup like this one. So let's dive in. So first things first, big thank you to LG UltraGear for sending across these monitors for us to check out. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I do have a lot of experience with other displays as well. We've tested out a few in recent months, including the Samsung 57-inch curved display as well. So it's important that you guys are aware that every display that we've tested here, including the monitors that we run on our triple 65-inch 4K rig, they have all been provided to us under the exact same conditions. So there's no sort of incentive to be saying positive things about one brand over the other or anything like that. That's not something that we would ever do here at Boosted Media anyway, but just wanted to give you the full context of exactly how we do things here if it's your first time watching the channel. So yeah, thank you to LG for sending these across to us. They haven't put any conditions on anything we say, of course. Yeah, it's purely just going to be my own observations and my own opinions on the experience using these monitors. So let's talk about these monitors in more detail now. I've got my cheat notes here so I don't get anything wrong. The exact model that we have here is the 45GS96QB. Now, as I mentioned earlier, these have a very aggressive curve radius of 800R, which means that at a viewing distance of 800 millimeters, which is exactly how we've got these set up. So my eyes are 800 millimeters from the center of the display. If I rotate my head around on the display, it should be maintaining that same 800 millimeter distance regardless of where I look on the display. So that means in general gaming and desktop applications, things look the same distance from you. They're not sort of being distorted away from you. You can imagine if you're looking at a flat panel, the further away you go from center, the further things are away from you. Now, as you can see here with the 800-degree radius, we've actually been able to continue that same arc all the way around here. Now that does come with some very important considerations when it comes to how you actually set up the sim, and we'll be covering that in a lot of detail in today's video. But the way we've set this up is we're continuing that same radius of 800 millimeters all the way around the almost 200-degree field of view that we have here. So at any point around the arc that I look at, within about 10 or 20 millimeters, depending on my head position, because obviously I'm not always going to be sitting in the exact same spot, but I should be pretty much, give or take, the exact same distance at any point on those screens. So 800 millimeter curve radius. Now I'm not going to make this a full detailed review of these panels themselves. You'll remember a little while back now, we actually reviewed the previous generation of this same display. I went into a lot more detail on the actual performance of the display and those kinds of things in that video. This is basically just a beefed up version of that. There's plenty of other reviews out there of these panels from people that are far better equipped to go into those kinds of details. I'm going to keep this more focused on just the experience of setting this up in a sim rig like what we have here, because I know that's why you guys are here. So yeah, refresh rate of 240 Hertz, although you're not going to be able to run that in a triple configuration. We'll talk about that in more detail a little bit later on. 0.03 millisecond G to G, an aspect ratio of 21:9, and a resolution of 3440 by 1440. Now, with regards to resolution, you might have already heard in the grapevine that there is a new model of these displays coming out. I believe it's going to be on display at CES in just a couple of weeks' time, and hopefully released by mid-year from what I've heard. Obviously, don't quote me on that, but that's what I've heard. So that is going to have a resolution of 2160 vertically, so quite significantly more than what we have here. I'm not sure exactly what the horizontal resolution will be. 4K resolution is 3840 by 2160. These are 3440 by 1440. So you can imagine the additional load that that extra resolution will put on your PC PC. Now we've been running triple 4K resolution, as I mentioned a couple of times now, on our daily driver rig for 4 years now. We were running that on a 2080 Ti originally, and we've gone all the way through the 30 series graphics card all the way up to the 4090 that we run now and have been running for the past year. And we typically, with the graphics cranked pretty much all the way up within reason at least, we're typically able to achieve around 80 frames per second in iRacing, and the graphics cranked down a little bit more in ACC, we're able to achieve somewhere between about 60 and 80. If we crank the graphics down in iRacing, we're able to get that up to, 144, which matches the refresh rate of the panels without too much drama. Now, on this particular rig, we're running a 3090 graphics card, and at the moment I'm getting 80 frames per second at this resolution. So with a 4090, you're going to be absolutely fine. You're going to be pushing probably close to 100 frames per second. If you were to increase that resolution, like what we're talking about with this new model display, I think you are going to start to get into the territory of trade-offs. So unless you're running a very high-end graphics card, remember, of course, the 50 series will be releasing relatively soon as well. So we're yet to see what the performance increase will be there. But definitely think long and hard about whether or not that extra resolution is actually going to be beneficial to you, or whether the benefits of that visually are actually going to be outweighed by the fact that you have to run your graphics settings lower to get a decent frame rate. Now, what I can tell you, running these panels at a viewing distance of 800, which, as we discussed, is the optimum viewing distance, the dot pitch is absolutely fine. In fact, it actually looks very similar to my 4K displays at the distance that I sit from those. So I'm not seeing any major sort of individual pixels or any jagged lines or anything like that. Obviously, you will see a little bit of aliasing here and there compared to a 4K panel, but it really isn't something. In fact, overall, because of the sharpness and the contrast ratio that we have with these displays, the picture overall does look a lot better than what it does on my triple 65-inch 4K displays. So look, I don't have any complaints at all when it comes to the visual clarity, the sharpness and the resolution here. And I mean, obviously we don't know what's going to happen with the price of these panels once that new model comes out. But what I would say right now is that there's no way I would be paying significantly more for those when I think that these provide an absolutely fine experience. And same goes for the older model of these panels as well. Those are quite significantly cheaper than these ones are now. And look, to my eye at least, they do provide quite a similar experience. So again, do your side-by-side comparisons there. There's plenty of comparison websites out there where you can see exactly the differences in brightness and all those important things. And yeah, just figure out for yourself whether you think that it's going to be worth the extra money for the more expensive panels, or whether it's worth waiting for that higher resolution as well. But all I can tell you is, from where I'm sitting right now, I'm absolutely fine with the 3440 by 1440 resolution. And I think it's a pretty good compromise as well in terms of performance. So just quickly before we move into the geometry related stuff, just a couple of things that have really stood out to me using these displays. Probably not going to be any surprise to you. The contrast ratio that you get with these OLED panels and the brightness is absolutely phenomenal. These are, of course, HDR as well. And yeah, look, the blacks are jet black. The bright areas are extremely vibrant, and what that means in terms of the driving experience is that it blends in with your cockpit and your environment extremely well. One of the complaints that I have in my triple 65-inch 4K rig, and you guys don't really see it in the driving videos because I tweak the footage in post to make it look good for the race videos, of course, but you notice the black areas of the dash on the screens are always a little bit more gray than the black areas below them on the physical cockpit. So you always have that separation between the two. With this setup, everything just blends in beautifully because the blacks are so deep on display. So it does lend itself to a more immersive experience overall, particularly if you're driving in a darkened environment or if you're driving in a cockpit that has physical elements all around you. I know it's very popular these days to build the cockpit out. So you've got things like floor panels and doors and fire extinguishers surrounding you. And in an environment like that, OLED panels really do make a very big difference. You don't want to be having the brightness absolutely crazy high because you don't want to be frying your eyes sitting so close in an environment like this. But yeah, just the visual clarity that you get is absolutely amazing. Another thing that's important as well is these monitors do have G-Sync or variable refresh rate. Now, again, depending on the graphics card that you're running, you're probably not going to be able to take advantage of the full refresh rate that's available on these. So chances are you will be making use of that. Even in scenarios where the frame rates dip down as low as sort of 55, 60 frames per second under crazy lighting conditions with lots of cars in ACC, for example, never noticed any sort of choppiness or tearing or anything like that. the screens do provide a very smooth and very fluid image. So that has been really good as well. There's been no instances of any sort of ghosting or anything weird in terms of response time or pixel response either. Everything is absolutely fine and sharp. Just one thing to be aware of with OLED panels is that they do suffer from burn-in. Now, these more modern panels do have a lot of features built in to mitigate that. One of the things we did notice is when we pulled that monitor out of the box, the other ones were fine, but this one, any sort of gray screen, we had this weird banding thing going on, and I ran through the pixel refresh tool that's built into the monitor, and it did correct it, and everything was absolutely fine. But just with burn-in, when you're driving in a sim rig, you are going to be having static elements on the display quite often. Same goes for general gaming. If you've got a heads-up display or like an ammo counter or something, anything that's going to be static on the screen all the time will be something that may end up burning into the display. So just be aware of that. It is an important consideration because they still haven't perfected the technology to the extent where that is no longer an issue. So just be aware of that, particularly if you are going to be using the monitors under multiple different scenarios. If you're only ever going to be playing one game, for example, the HUD elements are always going to be in the same place, and it's probably not going to be that big of a deal to you. But if you're changing things around, that may become a problem. And just set yourself in the habit as well of switching the displays off whenever you're not using them. Make sure you have a screensaver if you're not doing that, and yeah, just be sensible. And look, I haven't had any issues in the time that I've been using the older model of this, which I did actually run as my daily driver monitor on my upstairs computer for a while. But yeah, can't guarantee that it won't happen to you. So just something to be aware of. But yeah, picture quality is absolutely phenomenal on these displays. So let's get into the geometry side of things now, starting off with the physical hardware before we start getting into how we actually set up the software side of things. Because if you're buying a set of these monitors and you've already got a triple screen rig that you're intending to mount these on, chances are you're going to end up disappointed and have to make a couple of changes here. So first thing you need to know is that the centerpiece behind these monitors needs to be at least 1400 millimeters long. If it's shorter than that, you're not going to be able to get the angle that you need for the mounts for the side monitors. And then for your side braces, you're going to need at least 850 long. We went with 900 long just to give us a little bit of extra leeway there. None of the aluminium profile triple screen setups that I'm aware of actually come with length sufficient to achieve that. So you're probably going to have to get in touch with your supplier and ask them to send you some custom lengths. There are some local aluminium profile distributors as well. So you might be better off just ordering some lengths elsewhere to get the job done. Now, vario base amounts are going to be really important as well to get things really dialed in and fine-tuned. Because you're working with the curve and you want to have the curve the same all the way around, you're going to need to make some little adjustments to angles just to get the monitors placed to get that continuous curve. So that does make things a lot easier. Track Racer and SimLab both sell them. I'm not sure about other manufacturers, but just check, make sure you do have those for each of the monitors. That's just going to make your life so much easier, trust me. We've done it before with the triple 65-inch 4K monitors without those, and yeah, it was a nightmare. So definitely make the investment. You'll thank me later. Now, you might also notice that we have legs on here as well. Now, this is a integrated triple screen mount, and what we found is that there was just way too much weight on the outer extremities here, and it was just making the whole thing sag down, making it absolutely impossible to get the screens on the right angle and with the right placement, and any sort of movement in the rig as well was just making those sides bend. Now, with screens that are the size that this triple screen integrated mount is designed for, it wasn't a problem. So it's certainly not a criticism of the triple screen mount, but yeah, with screens this big and with this span, you are going to want to have extra legs on the outside here as well. Measurements of those obviously will just depend on how high you want your monitors placed, and we're going to talk about that in some detail now, in fact. So look, what we ended up doing is wanting to get the viewing distance, as I said before, 800 millimeters. So we had that continuous curve. Don't need to go all through that again, but we also wanted to try and get the monitors as low as we possibly could as well. So we will have a discussion a little bit later around vertical real estate and whether you feel like you're looking through a Ned Kelly helmet. But yeah, placement is really critical with these monitors. I wanted to have them nice and low, so I felt like I had a cockpit around me. One of my pet peeves is when you kind of have your screen ending halfway through the window, and you can see it is cut off a little bit over here, but it's kind of outside of my peripheral vision there anyway. So it was a compromise that I was willing to make. Now we've got the SimiCube 2 wheelbase on here as well. Anything longer, and it was going to mean that we had to put the screens further away, which would mean that we weren't able to maintain that 800 millimeter viewing distance. So obviously it will depend on how long your arms are and how you've got your cockpit set up ergonomically, but anything longer than that, so say the SimiCube 2 Ultimate, for example, would have been too long. We would have had to raise the screens up a little bit and make a compromise there. But we got the screens down as low as we possibly could. That gives me a nice sensation of the cockpit in the car wrapping around me and maintaining, at least for most cars, that sense of looking through a windscreen rather than like sitting in a convertible. You can imagine if the view through the windscreen is kind of cut off, so you're not actually seeing the top of the windscreen, it kind of makes you feel like you're driving a convertible, and it doesn't really work. And again, it will depend on the car that you're driving, but for something like a GT3, as you can see here, the perspective is absolutely fine. You can see here driving open wheelers as well, you do have plenty of vertical real estate. And look, that was probably the main concern that I had with these monitors, particularly coming across from my 65s, was, is there going to be enough vertical real estate, or is it just going to feel like I'm looking through a letterbox? And yeah, look, it honestly just hasn't ended up being the case with the FOV set as accurately as we could possibly get away with. So I want you to put on your thinking cap here for a moment. Now, imagine a straight line from point to point on each of these monitors. So rather than it being curved, you've got a straight flat panel from that corner there to that corner there, and then the same thing again from this corner to this point up here on the center screen. If you were to draw a straight line across there and then a straight line across here, the angle that you would have in the middle there, so this angle here, would be 70 degrees. So you're gonna have a 70-degree angle on your mounting brackets behind the screens, if that makes sense. So when you're setting everything up, you wanna keep that in mind. You're not gonna wanna have the monitors tilted in any further than that, and there's two reasons for that. Firstly, because obviously you're gonna lose that continuous viewing distance, which is kind of the whole reason why you might wanna have these displays in the first place. But also, you'll notice that towards the back of the screens, they are actually starting to wrap around behind me a little bit. So the widest point is actually about here on both screens before it starts to wrap back in again. So you can imagine if you had the curves set to aggressively here, then it's just gonna come behind you. It's gonna start to really distort quite severely. So that's the two reasons why we set the angles the way we have. And just so you're aware as well, the overall footprint, including the feet, once we do that, ends up being just a touch over 2 meters. So you're gonna need a 2 meter wide space to get this done at the absolute least. Getting in and out of the rig is absolutely fine. I've got about 50 centimeters here to work with to walk in and out. So that hasn't turned out to be a drama at all. But one other thing I do want you to be aware of is that no sort of bezel free kit is going to work with this setup, because you don't have any angle here. That relies, regardless of the type of kit you've got, whether it's the Asus kits or the lenses that you get out of an old LCD panel, what it relies on is having an angle of somewhere between about 50 and 70 degrees where it can bend the light between the two halves. So what you're seeing here is light bent from this side and so forth. When you've got a shallow angle like this, or basically no angle, it just simply won't work. So you put the panel up against it, and as you can see in this footage here, it's just not gonna do anything. So you're not gonna be able to run a bezel free kit. One of the advantages that you do have here is you've got quite a wide field of view on the center screen. So you don't feel like you're staring at the bezels all the time. In a lot of cars, this bezel does actually end up lining up with the A-pillar anyway, so it's not really an issue. And a lot of GT3 cars actually have lines down the middle of the windscreen anyway. So look, I am able to look past it. I don't struggle with it. Obviously for content creation, it's a deal breaker because you want to be able to have those bezel free kits to give that realistic look. A lot of people will struggle to see past those bezels and find it to be immersion breaking those. So again, it's a very individual, very subjective thing, but one of the limitations that I want you guys to be aware of, because I don't want you to be disappointed when you go and buy the bezel free kit and it doesn't work. So just be aware of that. And I think that's pretty much everything in terms of physical hardware setup that you need to be aware of. So yeah, just make sure you've got the right length profiles for mounting the screens. Make sure you've got those Vario Vesa mounts as well. Make sure you've got some legs that you can mount so you've got enough support on the outer sides so the things don't sag. And yeah, you shouldn't have any problems getting these in a suitable position. Again, you're just gonna wanna try and maintain that 800 millimeter distance from your eyes around the entire rig, and get the monitors as low as you can as well, so that you're really feeling like you're inside a cabin and you're immersed inside the vehicle rather than feeling like you're sitting on top of it. And that again is quite important, as you can see here, for open wheeler style cars as well. You want to be able to see a bit of car around you. You don't want to feel like you're kind of sitting on top of the car. So just be mindful of that as well. And yeah, look, I was actually really impressed with that. That was one of the things that I thought I might really struggle with, particularly coming from my big 65-inch screens. And yeah, it hasn't really been immersion breaking at all. I feel just as immersed when I'm playing in this rig, obviously content creation aside, as what I do in my triple 65-inch rig, which I really didn't expect. So yeah, in terms of immersion, it is really great. But this is where we start to get into the software side of things and where there are some really important compromises. So let's jump in now and I'll walk you through all the details. Now, you'll remember I mentioned earlier that there are limitations limitations in terms of the refresh rate. The panels have a native refresh rate of 240 Hertz. Unfortunately, to run 3 of these on an NVIDIA graphics card, at least at the time that we're making this video, you are going to have to disable DSC or display stream compression. That can be done through the monitor settings, as you see here. That is going to limit the refresh rate across the 3 panels to 144 Hertz. So when you set up NVIDIA Surround, or even if you're not using NVIDIA Surround, you will find that all 3 displays will be limited to 144 Hertz. Realistically, I don't really see this as being a major issue, quite simply because you're very unlikely to be getting above 144 frames per second at these kinds of resolutions anyway. So I'm gonna look like an absolute idiot here with my point of view helmet cam on, but this is gonna be important because it's gonna let you guys see exactly, well, pretty much exactly what I see. Make sure I do my strap up as well, safety first. Okay, I think we're all good here. So when we wrap around on each individual screen, obviously we wanna make sure that our bezels are lining up correctly with bezel correction. And the way we can do that is either through NVIDIA Surround, which is what I've done, or you can set it up in the software itself. Most of the sims support this, so it doesn't really matter which way you go. I just find NVIDIA Surround a little bit easier to work with. But you want to set up your bezel correction correctly, but obviously if the angles inside the game don't match the angles of your actual screens, you're gonna get weird warping and buckling happening in these areas here. Now, if you set the screens up to just be the angle that they would be if they were flat screens, you are gonna get kind of, I guess the best way to describe it is like a W shape, because it's gonna be bending in and out. And you can actually see that a little bit down here. You'll notice this continuous line on the dash just there actually bends slightly away from me. So it's like in a W shape as it comes down here. And then you can see as we curve around here, the back half of the car actually looks like it's starting to come back in towards me rather than continuing straight behind me. Now, the reason why I've set it up this way is basically because of the compromises that are necessary to make this work. So let's just show you exactly what I mean here. There's essentially 3 different ways that you can do this in most sims, and we will talk about some other sims in just a moment as well. But to start off here with iRacing, we click on monitors, and you can see I've got this set up as 3 flat screens with a monitor width of 1050, which is the physical monitor width. I did actually measure that. And you can see here the angle between the center and side screens I've got set as 30 degrees, and my viewing distance is set at 880, which just ended up being arbitrarily what looked best to me. Now, it's important to understand, this is what a lot of people don't get, is that this field of view calculator here is purely just a calculator. When you hit compute is when it actually makes the changes up here to compensate for whatever numbers you put in. So a lot of you are probably looking at this and thinking it looks really weird, but this ended up being the best compromise for me in iRacing. So if I were to set this up as 3 flat screens with an angle of 70 degrees, which as we talked about before would actually be correct if these were flat panels. So we set that to say 70 degrees and click done. And done. You can see straight away it all zooms in and it's all crazy. But if we take our field of view out here using the bracket keys, you'll notice the W shape that I was talking about there. So that is because it's expecting a 70-degree angle, which it kind of has, but because it's a continuous curve, you don't get that sharp angle there. And that's because it's treating it as 3 individual flat panels rather than a curved display. So that's the reason why it's bending away from you there. So you can see now if we look at the sides of the car actually look almost correct now. And you'll even notice that the side of the seat actually lines up with the side of my physical seat here as well. I don't know if you can see that on camera or not, but on both sides that actually physically looks correct. But because of the curvature of the screen, you've got this distortion here. So that's the reason why I made that compromise of 30 degrees, which kind of ends up being the best of both worlds. So if we go back again, set that back to 30 degrees, not 309, 30, and hit done, it's gonna throw us right back here. But then if we jump back in the car again and adjust our field of view, again using the bracket keys, so that our eye distance, as it says up here, is correct, so 800 millimeters, or thereabouts. It's not going to be exact, but yeah, within 10 or 15 mil is fine. You can see now the dash looks correct. We don't have quite such a big warp. There's still a little bit of a warp there, but you can see now the sides look a little bit distorted, but you can see how it's a game of compromise here. Now I actually ended up winding that out a little bit further so that my field of view was more correct, and then I'm adjusting my camera and my seating position to compensate for it. So as you can see, it is a game of compromise. Now that is if we set it up as 3 flat panels, which I actually felt worked best for my eyes, but you may disagree. The other ways you can do it as well is to set it up as one big curved monitor if you wanted to. So in this instance, you would put in the total monitor width across all 3 monitors, and then you can play around with the radius of the curvature to make it look relatively correct. But what you'll find is on the sides, it just ends up being absolutely crazy warped and the cars look really, really stretched. So that one just didn't really work for me at all. 3 curved screens is probably the one that's going to seem most logical to you guys. So if we put in a curve radius of 800 here with the correct monitor width for each individual monitor and then hit done and done, you can see it puts everything in perspective. But again, we've got that issue of the W-shaped thing happening down here. So we can wind in and wind out our field of view to get it to look relatively correct. But we've got that exact same problem that we saw before with the flat panels. The reason for that is because it does still treat, as far as I understand at least, and I did have a chat with iRacing about this, it does still treat it as 3 individual flat pieces, and it's basically just using those pieces and arranging them around the 3 screens. So it's not actually warping the display itself to create the perspective. It's just segmenting it into 3 separate sections, which is the reason why we still have that physical distortion there. So we can play around with the angles, and what I found best if you want to go with this mode was to increase our radius of curvature by double. So basically go the diameter rather than the radius. And if we hit OK on that, you can see now things kind of look right. Again, we can adjust our field of view and our seating position to compensate. So plus or minus, and you can see now things look relatively well proportioned, but I just found that the sense of speed was a little bit distorted when I set it up this way compared to the 3 flat panels at 30 degrees, but it is going to be very much a personal preference thing. Both of them work and both of them do give a good sense of immersion overall. It's just going to be personal preference. The other thing I'll mention here is you can make adjustments to your seat height and your horizon directly from the keyboard as well. So bracket up and bracket down is field of view. And then if you hold down Control and go up and down, you can see that is raising and lowering my seating position inside the car. And if I hold down Shift, you'll notice the red horizon line comes up on the screen, and then we can adjust our horizon position. So my eyes are pretty much level with the dead center of the screen. So that is where I want my horizon to be. But you will find in an open wheeler, you will need to make a few more compromises around these just to get everything in the right perspective. You want to run a little bit more angle on the horizon just to make sure you're looking down at the nose of the car to give you a little bit more visibility. So that's always a compromise with triple screens, but maybe a little bit more so with the triple displays like this. So I showed you these adjustments in iRacing basically because it just gives a better overall sense of exactly how things work. But what I'll do quickly now is just jump into a couple other sims and just show you the adjustments there as well, just so you got a complete picture. So a quick look at a Setto Corsa as well, and you can see what I've done here is very similar to what we did in iRacing to get the perspective correct. We don't have the option for curved displays here, so we do have to rely on the individual displays. And look, basically it just works exactly the same as what I showed you for the 3 flat panel option in iRacing. So we've got a rotation spinner here, which is the angle between each display set at 20 degrees. As we increase it, you can see those side displays start to bend in or out. And again, you can see that continuous line will start to buckle on either side. So we want to adjust that back down to about 20 degrees. Now the trade-off again for that is that you're going to start to see things bend back towards you along the sides as you get further away. You can see a distance adjustment here as well. We can increase or decrease that. I just found for this particular car, moving it back a little bit worked a little bit better for me, but again, it's going to be a personal preference thing. I know there will be the purists out there that say that it has to be exact, in which case I would have that set to 800. Because of the compromises elsewhere, I just found it looked a little bit more realistic to me, at least sitting in here when I had that wound back a little bit. So that is a quick look at a Setto Corsa. And look, it works pretty much exactly the same way in other sims as well. Le Mans Ultimate does actually have the option for curved displays, but essentially that just works exactly the same way as what we saw in iRacing. Or we'll just give you a quick look in ACC as well though. All right, so ACC now, you will need to make sure that you've got triple screen enabled in your display options. Once you've done that, you can go into view settings, and we're gonna scroll across to our triple and widescreen configuration. And you can see basically I've just put in the exact numbers that I have here. So my viewing distance is 800 millimeters, as you now understand. Screen width 1050 millimeters. Bezel width is 16 millimeters, just to erase any bezel weirdness that's going on in the corners. And then side screen angle, again, it's going to depend on the car that you're driving and how small the cabin is. So as you saw for the Emira that we were driving in AC, 20 degrees was about right. 70 degrees, which is the actual angle if they were flat panels, as you now understand, is going to start to buckle the sides. So you can see we get that weird W-shaped thing going on. So for this particular car, around that 30 degree mark looked right. If we go back as far as 20 degrees, you can see it starts to sort of warp things towards us a little bit more. So again, it's just a game of compromise. Dial it into the point where you feel it feels most correct. But what you will find is the further you go, the more correct it looks in front of you, the more warped it's going to look out to the side. And you can see now my mirrors and even that car alongside me there does look a little bit stretched. Whereas if we go back this way, up to 70 degrees, now you can see that actually looks, or we'll go to exactly 70 degrees. You can see now the perspective out the sides looks correct, but the dash here looks all out of whack. Now, it is also worth mentioning that there are screen warping tools available like Immersive LCD Pro, which is the one that I tested out. Now, these software packages are quite expensive. Just to give you a quick rundown on how you can use these to warp the screens and adjust the perspective. You can see around on the left-hand side here, what I've done is I've adjusted the top corner and the right-hand side corner here and on the bottom up and down a little bit, just to basically make the screens appear from my point of where I'm viewing the screens to be completely flat. So you can see we're losing a little bit of our panel at the top and bottom, but it does make the panels, at least to my eyes, it might not look the same way on camera, but it looks like a flat screen in each direction. Now that will adjust and account for some of the limitations that we were talking about before. But obviously, essentially what you're doing is you're negating all of the benefit that you get from having the curved displays in the first place and losing screen real estate as well. So, you know, kind of at that point, it doesn't really make sense to buy curved panels in the first place. So just wanted to let you know that that is an option that's available as well though. So I really hope that that gives you a good understanding of the compromises that are necessary, just purely because of the fact that the curve is so aggressive on these screens. And look, if it was a less aggressive curve, you wouldn't see that distortion on the sides here so much, and you could get away with, you know, having the perspective correct on the side. So look, as far as them being the ideal screens for sim racing, I'm gonna say in a triple screen configuration like this, no, I think that a triple flat screen configuration would work better. That would allow us to use our bezel free kits. It would allow us to have the perspective correct on the sides without warping and distortion in the middle. Does it work? Yes, but with compromises. Does it provide a very immersive experience when driving? Yes. And I think, you know, as long as you're aware of these compromises, the concern that I had was that, you know, there were some very big channels that went out and said that the setup was amazing and it was the perfect setup for sim racing. And look, I don't want to speak poorly of other channels. Obviously, they don't have the experience. A lot of them don't have the experience with other hardware that I do. You know, I have the benefit here of being able to compare this experience with a lot of other configurations. So I can say to you that, you know, it doesn't work as well. Are these screens absolutely amazing? Yes. As a single screen setup, it does work really, really, really well. I mean, obviously you do have the limitation of it being relatively narrow compared to a triple screen setup. So you are going to have visibility issues. You're not going to be able to see your side mirrors, for example, if you have your field of view set correctly. So really it's just down to where you're willing to make compromises. Picture quality wise, absolutely amazing. I think these screens are absolutely fantastic. The vertical real estate issue, as I described before, just didn't really end up being an issue for the majority of cars that I wanted to drive. And I do appreciate the fact that we do have a nice wide screen in front of us that places those bezels outside of your primary focus area or your sweet spot, so to speak. So, you know, the bezels aren't as noticeable as they would be on a smaller screen. Look, I've always said that I think triple 32s are around about the sweet spot when it comes to value for money, as well as providing an accurate and realistic field of view and immersion too. Smaller screens like that are going to come with the compromise of having to have them closer to you though to provide the same, you know, perspective into the virtual world. And that's going to come at the compromise of, depending how your rig's laid out, of course, you may end up having to have the screen up on top of the wheelbase, which then doesn't immerse you in the cabin as much. You may end up having to have the screen dropped down in between your wheel and your wheelbase, which on some wheelbases won't be possible, or, you know, there's going to be trade-offs in every area. So look, all compromises considered, I do think that this provides a really awesome immersive driving experience overall. But for the FOV purists out there that really want to have things absolutely perfect and exact, I do think that you might want to give this kind of configuration a miss. But look, immersion aside, does it actually have an impact on the driving experience? Look, I didn't find that I was any faster or slower with this configuration compared to my triple 65-inch 4K. But look, having said that, the sense of speed can be quite different depending on how you configure these. As we were talking about before, with the perspective kind of distorted towards you on the sides, it does stretch things, and cars that are coming up alongside you do tend to whiz by you a little bit more. If you compromise around that and have the side screens buckled out, then you'll notice that certain elements of the screen will start to warp away from you, and the sense of speed is very much distorted because things don't whiz past you accurately. They kind of look like they're rushing out to the sides, and that really does throw you off and makes it difficult to spot apexes and things like that. So having the side screens warped inwards is a bit of a necessary compromise to have the sense of speed correct within the sweet spot of your field of vision. But look, I mean, at the end of the day, it is just a game of trade-offs here. I'm not going to sit here and say that this is the ultimate setup for sim racing, because I don't think that it is. The screens are absolutely fantastic, and it does provide a really awesome immersive experience, but I do think that there are better options out there specifically for this kind of setup. And I think really the issue is primarily created by the aggressive curve radius on these particular screens. A little while back now, UltraGear did actually have a 48-inch panel with a less aggressive curve. That would have been ideal. Unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to try those out, but I think that would probably be a lot better of a fit, and hopefully they come out with something in 2025 that might be more along those kinds of lines, a little bit taller, a little bit narrower, but less aggressive curve, and able to get those triple screens dialed in absolutely perfectly. Now, of course, the other thing to consider here as well is that some games don't have any sort of perspective correction at all. So we did spend some time playing WRC, for example, and of course F124. And look, those don't really look any more distorted than they do on any triple screen setup, to be honest with you guys. The side screens are going to warp around you regardless of what you're doing with those games that don't have any sort of projection and correction. So look, it's no worse here or better than it is on a conventional setup, and really it's as simple as that, guys. So look, I hope that today's video has helped you out. Obviously, I can't test every single monitor that's available out there on the market, but hopefully this has given you a better understanding of some of the considerations and some of the compromises that you're going to have to make if you are looking at a setup like this. Overall, the visual quality is absolutely fantastic, and it does provide a very immersive experience. You can dial it in to look quite accurate as well within the sweet spot of your field of view. But for the FOV purists out there, I do feel like you may be on the side of some of these compromises that I've explained in today's video being a little bit too far for you to be happy with a setup like this. So really hope today's video has helped you out. If it has, please do leave a thumbs up. Check out some of those reviews of some other monitor setups that we've done as well. And of course, check out our crazy 65-inch 4K rig if you haven't already. And if you are looking at buying any sim racing gear, hit up boostedmedia.net for all the latest discount codes as well as affiliate links, which is an awesome way of helping support our work here at Boosted Media without it costing you an extra cent. We do really appreciate your support there. We've got a lot of really interesting stuff coming up in 2025. So yeah, stick around, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Make sure you're subscribed if you're not already, and I will see you again very soon. Bye.